Hello everyone. A little bit of painting progress. Just finished painting another 26 figures from Castaway Arts. They're Tuareg. In the very far distance I've put down 12 other figures that I painted from the same company some time ago now. So I've now got, 38 figures on foot, which will make up 3 groups of 12 for the game of The Men Who Would Be Kings, plus 2 spare. So about halfway towards having an army for the Tuareg to play. I've got to do some cavalry now to finish them off. Anyway, thought I'd show these to you. I tried a little bit of an experiment that went badly wrong in that I thought I would give contrast painting a go. That's with the group in the front, not with the ones at the rear. Yeah, it didn't work at all. I wasn't very happy with the results whatsoever. So they needed rescuing. The colour that I tried was obviously blue, just on the tunics, and it was just horrible. Really didn't like it, and I wasn't surprised really, because I'm not very keen on the appearance that I've seen with other people's figures that they've put up on YouTube. That's not to decry their painting standards or anything like that. It's just I'm not a big fan of washes in particular, and contrast paints to me just seem a bit like a wash. It reminds me in a way of the old army painter system where people were literally dipping figures. They were sort of block painting figures and then dunking them in tins of stain and bringing them out, and it works, yeah, and from a distance it's fine, but you know, when you look close up, it's just horrible. Yeah, but anyway, so just to kind of qualify that, what I was actually using, normally my main go-to paints are the Foundry Triad system, and you know, that's what I've got used to over the years, and I've kind of honed my techniques with that and get sort of reasonable results. But after that, my next sort of manufacturer who's I've got a lot of paints from is a company called Watercolours, and a few months back now Watercolours brought out a range of their own version of contrast paints, which they call Antithesis. So everything I'm saying really is based on the results I got from the Watercolours Antithesis paints rather than Citadel's contrast paints, but they clearly work in the same way. The 3 things that I was aiming to kind of experiment with was partly to see what the effect was going to look like at the end, and I was already kind of you know, sort of had already made up my mind about that, but that, you know, the final result confirmed my opinion that I don't like the look of contrast painting. The second one was to see if it saved me any time, because I can see a role for contrast paints if you do need to bash out figures in a hurry, and because I was so displeased with the result, and I had to kind of overpaint them and, you know, sort of remedy them a lot, it didn't save me any time at all. The other thing that it strikes me is that you know, whilst you can be fairly kind of slapdash with contrast painting in the first stages, you do have to take more care as you progress through the figure. So you are having to be careful with your brush strokes and so on, and that means that you don't save a lot of time basically from the way I normally paint my figures. It didn't seem to be time saving. But the final thing was that the reason I chose these Tuareg is that I'm sort of looking for a particular kind of tone, blue colours, tones of blue, and I can see a role for kind of contrast paints in that they do offer you a more kind of paints in your armoury, as it were. More opportunity to achieve a particular colour that you might be going for. Now, in the earlier group, I painted using foundry triads mainly, with some other. The turban on this guy here was probably about as close as I got to the blue that I was after. So having tried this contrast paints on the tunics and then reverted back to my more conventional paints, the tunics, because I'd had to overpaint them and so on, they all turned out a lot darker than I wanted. But I am getting there now with the kind of blue that that I'm after. So if you look on the turban of this guy here, that's the sort of blue that I'm trying to achieve. And now with the cavalry, I'm just going to kind of concentrate on that kind of that appearance. And obviously you need to kind of, you can't have them all wearing sort of uniform, sort of shades of blue. So I've got the ability now to be able to kind of darken that or lighten it and so on, and be able to break the colours up whilst sort of concentrating on that. So I know the way forward, but contrast paints, isn't it? So I just wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the paints in particular, because you do get a lot. There are a lot of proponents of contrast painting on YouTube. Just recently, there's been a couple of people who have expressed similar kind of misgivings as myself. Graham at Graham's War Games Vault tried out some contrast painting, mainly because he wanted to see if he could bash out some armies for Saga Age of Hannibal's in Hurry, and he wasn't totally unhappy with the results. He's keeping an open mind about it, but he says there were some particular colours, especially things like flesh tones, that he just wasn't happy with. And Miller at Miller's Miniatures as well, he tried contrast paints on horses, which I have heard is a quick and easy way to paint horses. And again, you could see, I agreed with him entirely that you could see, they just didn't look right. They looked like the contrast paint had pulled in the wrong places and given kind of unnatural sort of stains to it and so on. A patchy kind of appearance, just didn't look right. So he was understandably, looking for ways to kind of correct that. But the main people who sort of, don't necessarily rave about contrast, but say they're finding it a useful kind of tool. If you look carefully, at their figures, if they do show them close up, they're not ideal. And if they do look okay, it's normally because they're not using the paints in the way that the manufacturer really intends them to be used. They're either thinning them down even further so that they turn into a kind of wash rather than a contrast paint, or they're being very careful about how they apply them, or they're sort of wiping off excess paint that's collected too heavily, that gravity has taken down. So I think in that respect, kind of contrast paints are really sort of failing. You know, if you do have to take those measures, then they're not really being used in the way that's intended. So I just wanted to read to you from the Watercolours website, their blurb on antithesis paint, their range of antithesis paints. So what it tells you to do is to just apply a generous coat of antithesis paint over a layer of any of the antithesis primers, or white undercoat works well too, to get an extraordinary vivid base and realistic shading. Just wash and go. So their primers, they do 4 different primers. I'll just put them in the background there so that you can see. They are all very light. You have warm grey, cool grey, ivory and white. Okay, so they're the primers. They're all going to give you a very light undercoat or priming. And then what you're as it says, what you're supposed to do is then apply a generous amount of their antithesis paint. Now, I bought their entire selection. There's 36 bottles, but they really only have a couple that that are anywhere close to the sort of blue that I'm looking for. So this is their antithesis blue. Now, the things I find interesting about this particular, you know, brand is that you can see that it calls the paint translucent. So I'm very keen on their translucent paints. Somewhere here. Yeah, you may not be able to read the label on this, but this is their translucent blue. Now, there's a big difference between these two paints, all the same. The antithesis paint is literally kind of designed as I think it's a gel. Hang on, if I can just find it here. Yeah. Okay, so that was the next thing I was going to read out to you. It says, why even bother trying it? Well, Watercolours antithesis, beg pardon, is using a modified gel medium that makes the paint flow into the recesses, but at the same time staying exactly where you placed it. Gravity will not affect it, and it will not pull at the bottom of the miniature. So the difference between their ordinary translucent blue and their antithesis blue is that this is a kind of modified gel which will collect in recesses, whereas this one will be applied uniformly over the surface that you're painting. And I really like using their translucent paints because I tend to sort of apply it over Wargames Foundry triads and so on, and it does sort of break or reduce rather the kind of contrast between the 3 shades, so it will kind of narrow the differences between the 3 shades of the triad. If I did that with this one, it wouldn't work because if according to the description, it will then head towards the darker areas of the painting, making them that kind of colour, whilst not really looking so apparent on the areas that I've used, you know, with the highlight paints, with the sort of lighter colours. So there is a difference between them. The next thing that it says on the website is, so do I just splodge it on? Yes, just paint a generous layer of paint over the undercoat. Do not worry about the messy looking result while wet. The paint will work its magic while drying. This has been tested by 8-year-olds. Now, this is exactly what happened, that it did look a mess, but the magic didn't happen as it dried. It just looked a mess afterwards as well. So, it just didn't work for me, as I say, and I had to go on and correct it. But this is why I'm saying really that the people who are modifying their Citadel contrast paints are really kind of they've given up on the description. Really, if you mix it with more medium, with mixing medium, then you're turning it into more of a wash. If you're having to kind of brush off places where it's slipped down the figure and collected because of gravity, then the paint shouldn't be doing that in the first place. It shouldn't be so thin in the first place that it is actually running down the figure and collecting in the sort of lower parts of the figure. It should somehow miraculously be finding its way into recesses. So that's another thing, that you do need to be painting it onto a surface that is recessed. It just doesn't work if you're painting it onto a flat surface. So anyway, I'm not stuck with them now, because I can see I can see there are going to be uses for these antithesis paints. Mainly using them, applying them to the deeper areas anyway, and treating them as though I'm just sort of applying another sort of layer of paint over the recessed areas and getting slightly different colours, or indeed mixing them in. But I thought I would talk a little bit more about watercolours paints in general, because they're not, you don't see them mentioned very often. They're not particularly well, they don't have a particularly high profile for some reason in the UK. They're companies based in Cyprus. And once I discovered them, there was someone on a YouTube channel who was using them and recommended them, and I tried a few out, and I've got hundreds of them since. I really like them. So basically, they're not triads. There are 5 shades of any one colour. So rather than the Wargame Foundry 3 shades, there are 5. So this here is their turquoise shade, and you can see 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and they're sort of getting darker as they ascend in number. Now, the other thing to note is that all of these paints have got are described as opaque, and they have 3 bars that are full. So for every one of these different shades, they also do a semi-opaque. So for instance, no, that's not one. Yeah, well, apologies again, you may not be able to read this label because it's quite a dark paint, but that has actually only got 2 bars filled rather than 3, and it's described as semi-opaque. Don't know if you can be able to see that in the dark. So they do an opaque, a semi-opaque, and a translucent for each of the 5. So in other words, there aren't 5, there are 15 pots of paint that you could possibly buy for their for each colour, as well as the fact that you also can get these translucent paints, which transparent paints, beg your pardon, which the bars are completely empty. So I haven't got it out, but I have got a transparent turquoise as well. So there is kind of an immense sort of range of possibilities and potential in the paint range. Some seem to me to be better than others. There's some of their colours I don't like, but I'm sort of really keen on them. and that is what I've used to achieve all of the turbans apart from one figure. So all of the turbans I've actually been using watercolours paints rather than foundry paints on these. Other things like the undergarments and the skin tones and the weaponry and so on, I've used foundry triads. But anyway, I just thought I would give you my opinion, whether you agree or not. You know, it's not a problem. It's just my personal feeling is that you know, contrast paints have their uses, but I haven't got one for them particularly. I'm going to have to make use of those paints that I purchased in ways that weren't intended. The other thing that I do think is a bit of a shame in a way as well is that it is sold as this kind of miracle paint, and it does mean if you're starting off in the hobby or you really get sold on them, then there's nowhere to go. Once you started using them, then how are you going to progress? You know, how are you going to improve your painting technique? Which everybody's painting technique does get better as you gain in experience and the years go by. But if you're starting off in the hobby and you want a quick and efficient way of reaching a kind of reasonable level of painting, you know, then that's good because it gets you into the hobby quickly, or it gets your army onto the table quickly. But there's nowhere to go after that. That's what you're going to be using for the rest of your wargaming, you know, career. So I think you have to be a little bit careful about it, as you know, in that respect as well. So as you can tell, I'm not sold on it. But anyway, back to these figures. I'm not sure if I told you or not the range, the manufacturer. Just zoom in a little bit so you can see them in a little bit more detail. They're from Castaway Arts, which is an Australian company. I really like their Castaway Arts ranges. They tend to specialise in kind of colonial period figures. They strike me as being historically very accurate. A lot of Tuareg don't have the appropriate kind of spears, weaponry, shields in particular, the wrong kind of shapes and that. And Castaway struck me as being, you know, very kind of well researched. So they were the company I decided to go for. I have bought a lot of their Foreign Legion as well, so I will probably, you know, in the future replace a lot of my Foreign Legion troops or supplement them mainly with Castaway Arts. But having gone on about contrast paints, you know, I'm not displeased by the way they turned out. It's just all the tunics. I can tell, you know, I can see underneath, you know, if you look carefully, I can see all the kind of staining and so on that I'm not keen on, and they are a lot darker than, they came out a lot darker than was my original intention, but I'm not displeased by the way they turned out. And a little bit closer to playing my first game of The Men Who Would Be Kings. So there we go. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and see you on the next video. Bye for now.